One more thing about toxicity, we found a central nervous system depressant called butanediol in 47% of the top 10 fast food samples that we tested. And it is that central nervous system depressant, these side effects actually say causes aggression. Even if you don't eat fast food, I would be concerned about the person driving in the car next to you consuming fast food. I'd be concerned about your babysitter, your children's teachers, their school coach. If they're eating a meal from Jack in the Box and they're hopped up on butanediol, how are they going to treat your child? So to me, this is a community issue. This is not just a my family needs to eat organic issue. Because of the levels of violence that are happening in America today. It's 2 mass shootings a day happening in America. We're the most violent country in the world and supposed to be the most powerful and one of the most educated. It's absolutely ridiculous what's happening. So we also have extreme concern about violence and aggression because of the lack of nutrients in the food that we tested. What we mean by that is vitamin B deficiency has been directly linked to increased aggression and violence.
Welcome back to the Medical Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. We have a special guest, a woman who has literally transformed America. Her name is Zen Honeycutt. And if you haven't heard of her, the reason why is you probably know her best as Moms Across America. She founded a nonprofit that has actually tested different foods, different lunches, etc., and tested it for all the moms. They know what's in it. Additionally, she's the author of a best-selling book called Unstoppable, which is available on Amazon. And Zen, can you please introduce yourself to the audience and let them know a little bit about you?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Adam. I appreciate you and all your listeners. And I'm happy to be here to share more about what's going on in the food supply. It is our mission to educate and empower mothers and others with actions and solutions to create healthy communities. And that is needed more than ever right now. Like millions of moms and dads listening, probably, or across the country, I struggled with my children's health issues when they were very little. They had anywhere between 19 to 21 different food allergies. One had autism symptoms at one time and asthma. They all had autoimmune issues. They were allergic to things that my then husband and I were never allergic to when we were children. So we knew something was going on. And in the process of finding out about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and glyphosate, the most widely used herbicide in the world that's sprayed on our food supply, in the process of learning all of that, I started Moms Across America, which is a 501c3 nonprofit now, and did that by initiating and inviting people to join into 4th of July parades to raise awareness about GMOs and labeling them and the benefits of organic. So that initiation back in July of 2013 had 179 groups join into 4th of July parades with banners that say Moms Across America March to Label GMOs. And we reached thousands locally and millions nationally in a single day, with leaders from those groups then going on to create about 600 leaders created over 1,000 events in the next 5 years. So our reach on Facebook went from 0 to 300,000 a week in less than 3 months. And it was a very exciting time because we moms knew and families knew that when our children eat better, when they eat organic, they get better from these health issues, which is what I saw in my children and which I'm sure we'll get into more during this podcast.
Absolutely. And, one thing that when I first came across your organization, Moms Across America, first off, what a godsend, because there's nobody out there doing this kind of testing at all. And, we have all these, huge federal agencies with massive budgets and like
13 billion. Yeah, the EPA's budget is 13 billion. Yeah, and they're not doing the testing, and the FDA is not doing the testing either that we are doing. And it all comes from small donations from small donors and, a few wealthy individuals that support it, and some other trusts and it's just people who they don't care about getting anything back. They just want to have a healthy, safe food supply. And our team is working on a shoestring to make this happen. But that's what moms do. We wear 6 hats and we get things done. Even if we don't even have 2 pennies to rub together, we'll make something happen. So we've been doing this for 12 years now. And we initiated the first glyphosate testing back in 2013. The results came out in 2014. And we found glyphosate in breast milk 3,000 times higher than has been shown to cause sex hormone changes and liver and kidney damage in animal studies. And we also found it it was between 70 to 90% of the tap water and the urine of our children and our family members. Some of the levels of glyphosate found in our bodies, like my son, for instance, he was the first one tested and he had a sudden onset of autism symptoms at that time. His levels were the levels of a farmer. And he
Whoa.
was not farming with glyphosate. He was consuming wheat products like burger buns and pita bread and, cookies and things like that were made out of wheat. And what I'd learned during that time is that wheat is often sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent. So they use Roundup just before harvest. They say it's a pre-harvest weed killer. That's the euphemism that they use, but they're actually using it to dry the crop out so that they can harvest it faster. And what they are ignoring, it's not that they're unaware, but what they're ignoring is that that glyphosate chemicals, the glyphosate herbicides, do not wash, dry, or cook off. They stay on the crop, and we consume those residues. And the crop may be, the GMO crops may be Roundup ready, or the wheat may dry out and it may be beneficial for them, but it's not beneficial for us, and we're not Roundup ready. So we consume those residues, and glyphosate herbicides are carcinogenic, endocrine disrupting, cause liver and kidney damage, cause damage to sperm, androgenizes baby girls, connected to miscarriages and birth defects. And I know I'm forgetting some: nervous system damage, neurological damage. We'll get into all of that. It's a very insidious and prevalent herbicide in our country and in our world.
Well, that's one of the things I think was kind of the biggest shock for me was when I came across your information, and I started to see these really crazy glyphosate levels, and then one of the things that I also, a lot of people may not, they may not be totally aware, because whenever I mention this to even other physicians, many times they're like, oh, what's that exactly? And then I say Roundup,
Mm-hmm.
and like, okay, I get it. But just like you'd mentioned, I think a lot of people don't realize that it is considered normal part of agribusiness to spray Roundup on the crops to make them easier for the combine to go through and harvest. Is that correct?
Right.
And
Yes. So Roundup is sprayed not just on Roundup ready crops, which are GMO, genetically modified organisms, engineered to withstand it, such as corn, soy, and sugar beets. That is one type of crop that Roundup is sprayed on, and that is as a weed killer. So the weeds will die, but the crop is genetically engineered to withstand the spraying of, and frequent sprayings of Roundup. They can spray before, they spray during, they could spray just before harvest, and the crop will not die. The problem is though that glyphosate does get absorbed into the crop, and we do consume it. The second type of crop that Roundup is sprayed on, and it's not just Roundup, it's Ranger Pro. There's 750 different names of herbicides with glyphosate in it. Okay. And so Roundup is one of them, and it's sprayed on crops that they want to dry before harvest, such as wheat, peas, beans, legumes, hops, barley. Sorry, beer drinkers. Glyphosate has been found in beer. Yeah, so glyphosate is used as a drying agent before harvest. It's called a desiccant on many crops, and those crops are not GMO crops. They are regular conventional crops. They're just not organic. They don't allow this to happen on organic crops. So consuming organic food, if you want to avoid glyphosate, is your best option. However, there is small amounts of contamination because of rain and drift and irrigation waters. So it's very difficult to avoid it. And that's why, detoxing practically on a daily basis is a really good idea, whether you do it through food or bentonite clay or, activated charcoal or sweating. You can just run and sweat and, jump on a trampoline. Things like that can help you detox. It's a really good idea.
well, one of the things that we know about glyphosate is basically we do know that it's the World Health Organization put it on the list of carcinogens in like 2015, right? I mean,
Yes, they did. Yes, so they said that they reviewed, I believe it was 67 studies that our EPA did not review. So our EPA ignored 67 of the studies that the World Health Organization, IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer, it is an agency that reviews carcinogenic, chemicals and substances, and they put glyphosate on the carcinogenic list. They said it's a definite carcinogen to animals and a probable carcinogen to human beings, But the last time I checked, we were in the animal category. So I don't know how there's there's a lack of something that's going on there. And I believe it's only because they can't test glyphosate directly on humans. They say it's not. I've talked to the EPA about this. I'm like, you don't have studies showing that glyphosate is safe for human beings. They're like, well, we have hundreds of studies. I'm like, yeah, but not on human beings. And they said, well, it's not ethical to test pesticides on human beings. And I said, well, if it's not ethical to test pesticides on human beings, how can it be ethical to allow them in our breast milk and in our food, in our urine, in our children's bodies? You need to stop it, and you need to stop it now. You're poisoning our families. And they were, very taken aback. And after I left, somebody mentioned that, overheard them on the phone. They were like, well, what do you do with that? And that's the thing. What do you do with an angry mom that will not stop? Right? That will just keep going. And I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about the millions of moms that are in our network now that are telling people about what's going on. And, I just got statistics from the Organic Trade Association that the organic marketplace is now over $67 billion. It has doubled since we've started in 2013. And I think that is a direct causation of not just our moms, but, many different organizations are raising awareness about what's going on in the food supply, but our moms have been particularly bold and outspoken about it because they have children with autism and allergies and autoimmune issues, or sisters with cancer, or mothers with, endocrine disrupting, hormonal problems. And they know why this is happening. They know that there is a direct, really, connection to consuming glyphosate in practically every meal if you are not eating organic, especially if you're eating wheat and peas and beans and legumes and things like that, which is, corn, soy. It's in practically everything. So Americans are being poisoned by this herbicide, and on a consistent basis. And it is and what we are seeing, as you as a medical doctor, is higher rates of cancer, anxiety, nervous system damage, neurological damage, mental health issues, increased addiction. I hope we can talk more about that. Also, infertility problems, birth defects, troubles getting pregnant, increased risk of autism. There is a study that shows that when the mother was exposed to glyphosate, especially the baby boys, for some reason, boys are more affected than girls. They had a much higher incident of autism later when they were born. So there's a connection to glyphosate, to autism and Alzheimer's, and all kinds of neurological disorders as well. So the World Health Organization did put it on the carcinogenic list. We're waiting for them to also acknowledge it as an endocrine disruptor. And we have pushed the needle on that issues. We've sent letters and studies and things like that. And that's another one that it needs to be recognized for being an endocrine disruptor as well.
Yeah, I think 100% not only is it an endocrine disruptor, I think it has many other downstream effects. But one of the things that I see is that even, my wife, for example, has celiac disease. She never had that issue before, but then after chronic exposure to wheat, she develops these horrible, allergies, right, to anything that's
Yes.
wheat-based. And what was kind of eye-opening to me was that in the United States, she couldn't eat any wheat. But if we went to, say, like Argentina or went to a different country, she could. And and that's when I first started to kind of be a little bit aware of this, because I thought, man, why is it that, the wheats should be the same or pretty similar, but why is it here in the US when, you have an allergy? And we see more and more of this. And I'll tell you also that we recently ran a study. So we have a medical spa that does skincare consults. And we had a lot of primarily women approach us. And this is, from all over the United States, because we do these consults online. So we have like a good sample size. This is just kind of random people from all over the US. And basically what we found was that over 25% of women had Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune attack of the thyroid. And it's so interesting because we know for a fact that this is a major endocrine disruptor and it causes a lot of molecular mimicry. And so it would not be, for example, when we try to look for the one common thing that all these people had, they all had exposure to pre-processed food and pre-processed meals. And the thing is that we know that glyphosate, for example, can model or mimic like many of the receptors and these kind of things that we have in the endocrine system, and it could even potentially cause and worsen Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and other endocrine issues as well.
Absolutely. There are charts by Dr. Nancy Swanson that shows the correlation between the increased use of glyphosate and the increased incidence of thyroid disease. And like 99.9%. Same with autism, the same with the connection between the rise of thyroid issues and liver and kidney disease and cancer and autism. I'm not sure if I have all of the other ones, but there's so many different diseases. The charts that she has, we'll give links to you that you can supply to your viewers. The correlation is closer than that between smoking and lung cancer. It's a very, very strong correlation. And there are studies now to show causation, for instance, of liver and kidney disease at 4 parts per billion per kilogram per body weight in rats, which are ultra low levels, according to scientists, ultra low levels, which are below the levels that the EPA allows in the food supply, proving that the regulators are not doing their job by setting, levels that are safe for humans. They're in fact pandering to the corporations that want to protect the profits of their shareholders. And instead they are putting into place, a maximum residue level, daily amounts, right, that human beings can consume that are completely unsafe and are contributing to the health crisis, both physical and mental health crisis that we have in America today, which is bankrupting our country. I mean, if you could say that, that's theoretically they should be, these costs would be bankrupting our country if our government didn't keep printing more money. But now we're spending $4 trillion a year, which is 4 times the amount of the military budget. People used to be all in an uproar about the military budget and how much we're spending in the military compared to our educational system. Well, where's the outrage about the amount of money that we're spending on healthcare in this country when we know the solutions? We know this, it's no mystery. We really don't need any more scientific studies to show that you need to stop spraying poison on food if you want to get your citizens to be better and to stop spending so much on healthcare. Like, that's just step number 1, stop spraying poison on the food.
Well, I think that you have a great point there. And I think it's very sad to me that we have an EPA who does basically nothing. I mean, they really have done nothing. And just like even with your data, they should have immediately taken action based on that data. But of course they didn't. And they've also known about it for a long time. And they've also known about fluoride too. I mean, there's a lot of other things that they've essentially, purposely avoided. And then, one of the things that I found was really interesting is as I delve more into, after when it's Moms Across America, I kind of delve more into like, who's really controlling this, And we found out that basically, Monsanto was the original manufacturer patent holder for Roundup. And then, still to this day, I think we have our number here is that they're still the number 1 distributor of glyphosate related herbicides in the entire world. Is Monsanto, which of course you might be aware has been purchased by Bayer, the drug company.
Yes.
And so it's funny that you have a drug company now that owns this other company, Monsanto, which is essentially causing disease. And if the parent company is the one who's supposed to treat disease. So it's very suspicious to me that is even allowed, but I think there's definitely a lot of suppression on this because we see now, I mean, it's in the past, if you go back, 40 years ago, to find someone with autoimmune illness was somewhat rare. Now it's everyone and their brother has autoimmune illness,
Yes. And Monsanto / Bayer is they're not the only companies profiting off this. Syngenta is actually, which is now ChemChina / Syngenta, is the largest pesticide producer in the world. And their sister company, AstraZeneca, is actually producing 400 different drugs that treat the very same symptoms that these pesticides that their, sister company creates. So it is a perfect profit circle for them. And the same thing with Dow DuPont. They produce all kinds of pesticides and chemicals, and they also are the largest producers of probiotics. There are certain probiotic strains that a lot of companies buy. I believe even some organic, probiotic type companies purchase from this company that is, I don't remember the name of it now, it begins with a D, but it is under DuPont. And so DuPont, makes the chemicals, and then they also make the medications or the probiotics, that are supposed to treat us and make us better. So it is a perfect profit circle for them. And the way to opt out of that, I mean, the best way is to grow your own food, but most people can't grow enough to feed their family. So if you're not going to be growing your own food, purchase your food from your local farmer's market, purchase, food from people that if it's not doesn't say USDA organic and non-GMO project verified, make sure that it's at least organically grown, knowing your farmer is the best way to go about that. And also, trying to buy local as much as possible or from co-ops where there's going to be less likely to, be sitting in a grocery store and sprayed with preservatives.
Absolutely. And I think that for most Americans, and especially for busy moms, it's really tough because, the fast food is so easy. Kids are hungry, you're trying to do 20 things, you got to, drive somebody here, get this and that. And so it comes to a point where it's so even, time consuming and extra difficulty just trying to get the healthy foods for your children. But one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is most restaurants buy their food from pre-manufactured companies like Cisco Systems and these kind of things, which use the, essentially Roundup treated food.
The same food as fast food too. Yeah. So even places like Olive Garden, we talked to a woman who was a processor of chicken. She worked in a chicken factory. We found her contacted us off TikTok, and she processed the chicken for Chick-fil-A sandwiches, but that same chicken also went to Olive Garden. So, just because it doesn't occur to you as a fast food restaurant and it's a sit down, establishment, they could be using the same exact food, and higher end restaurants could as well. It's really just a matter of this, sourcing mostly from the same. I believe there's either 4 or 6 main meat processing companies in America. There is a definite monopoly on meat processing companies, and they process, tens of thousands in each one, probably per hour, of these animals, and, send this meat out all across the country and process it all in the same way. And it's very unsanitary, the conditions. So, and that's all confined animal feeding, operations, animals who are crammed into cages. They're pumped full of antibiotics and hormones. You mentioned fast food, so I'm going to mention the fast food testing results that we found.
Please.
We found 100% of the fast food samples positive for glyphosate, and whether it was trace levels or high levels. And the highest levels were in Panera Bread sandwiches, and the next were Arby's. And we believe that's because of the wheat being sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent. And we also found that the Impossible Burger products that was in the Burger King sandwich and also the Starbucks sausage breakfast sandwich, the Impossible Food products were twice as high in glyphosate, nearly twice as high in glyphosate as their meat counterparts. And that is because of the GMO soy, we believe, in the product. And so we also found 100% of the fast food samples positive for heavy metals, especially lead and cadmium, which can cause lifelong neurological damage and or cancer. And even very small levels is extremely problematic for humans because it's very difficult for us to detox that. And they're just very impactful. We also found 74% positive for pesticides, so up to 29 different types of pesticides, and nobody's doing any type of testing on the synergistic effects of all these different pesticides. And what I mean by that is, if for any of your listeners out there remember making a volcano in second grade, you put baking soda in with vinegar and it bubbled up and made a volcano-like, had a volcano-like reaction. Well, what is 29 or 8 or 6 or 15 different pesticides doing in our body, right? What is the synergistic reaction of those pesticides? No one is studying that. The EPA is not requiring tests on that. The FDA is not acknowledging that. So there's a major problem with all those different pesticides as well. Glyphosate's been found on gauze that's in hospitals. It's used on wounds. It's been found in sanitary napkins and tampons that women use in their private parts. It's been found in, clothing and all kinds of foods, orange juice, wine, beer, eggs at very high levels, dairy products, wheat, cookies, cracker, all kinds of thousands and thousands of types of foods. So it's very prevalent in our food supply and in other, body care products as well.
Well, I'm so glad you did that research, because to me, it was such a big shock. And then what blew me away was that they're really, for a substance, a chemical that is basically everywhere. Not only is it, on crops and food, but also eventually gets its way into the water supply because of that. So even once you break it down once, you still have an active form within your body. And it's in
Yeah, it's
these
called AMPA. I
exactly.
can't pronounce the whole word. It's very long, but it's AMPA. It's the breakdown of glyphosate, and it's actually more toxic. So we tested for both, and we found, one or the other present in every single one of the fast food samples. Oh, so what I was doing was talking about fast food, and I sort of digressed a little bit. But the fast food samples that, they had the glyphosate, heavy metals, pesticides. They also had veterinary drugs and hormones. And we found in the Chick-fil-A sandwich, we found a veterinary drug called narcarbazine, which is an antiparasitic, and it also happens to be an aviary contraceptive. It's given to pigeons and geese around airports and, state capitals and things like that to prevent them from laying eggs. And that was found in one of the fast food samples, a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And it was also found in 4 of the school lunch samples. And the school lunch results were very similar to the fast food testing results. And that was not a huge surprise to us, but we did want to confirm it because fast food suppliers are actually the major suppliers for school lunches.
Wow.
And most people don't know this. It's because of their distribution ability is, nationwide. So that is a major problem that fast food suppliers, which have such high toxin content and such low nutrient content, are supplying food to our children on a daily basis. It's 30 million GMO meals are being served each day to our children in the schools, breakfast and lunches. And we have also, through the fast food system, this toxicity and this lack of nutrients. So I'm going to talk about the nutrients a little bit, but actually before that, one more thing about toxicity. We found a central nervous system depressant called butadiol in 47% of the top 10 fast food samples that we tested.
Whoa.
And it is that central nervous system depressant, these side effects actually say causes aggression and combativeness. It says it causes combativeness. Another word for that is aggression. So even if you don't eat fast food, I would be concerned about the person driving in the car next to you consuming fast food. I'd be concerned about your babysitter, your children's teachers, their school coach. If they're eating a meal from Jack in the Box and they're hopped up on butadiol, how are they going to treat your child? So to me, this is a community issue. This is not just a my family needs to eat organic issue because of the levels of violence that are happening in America today. It's two school mass shootings a day, not school, but mass shootings a day happening in America. We're the most violent country in the world and supposed to be the most powerful and one of the most educated. This is absolutely ridiculous what's happening. So we also have a severe concern, extreme concern about violence and aggression because of the lack of nutrients in the food that we tested. And what we mean by that is vitamin B deficiency has been directly linked to increased aggression and violence. And if you read the book, Food and Behavior, A Natural Connection by Barbara Stitt, she's a Lifetime Achievement Award winner. She studied the food supply for over 20 years and did year-long studies on prisoners and high school dropouts, parolees, criminals, serial killers, people like that. And what she found was that they bragged that the one thing that they had in common was that they bragged that they lived on junk food. So nutrient deficient food, which is we have proven is nutrient deficient. And I will talk more about that. And she found that when she switched the food over from the highly processed junk food and, the sugar and the candies and the, everything in the schools and in the prisons to wholesome foods, that the recidivism in the prison switched. Instead of 70% coming in and going back out and then coming back in again within a year, a 70% return rate, there was a 70% staying out rate. It switched when they had whole healthy foods in prison for a year. And when they had proper supplements and nutrition, they, just supplemented some with placebo group as well. The group that actually got the proper nutrition, minerals, and supplements had a 50 to 70% drop in violent behavior in 1 to 2 weeks. So we know that with proper nutrition and supplementation and proper food, people behave better. They make better choices. That's because their prefrontal cortex is getting vitamin Bs and more of the nutrients that they need for their bodies to function. And vitamin B has been directly linked in numerous studies, and not just in Barbara Stitt's study showing also a deficiency in vitamin B in these criminals and parolees, but also in a study about hamsters out of Germany. It's out of the University of Strasbourg. And there was a farmer that had a monocrop cornfield that showed that he had a depletion of these hamsters. I know he was very concerned about his hamster population, very caring farmer. And so he had some scientists from the University of Strasbourg come out and study these hamsters. And what they found was a very disturbing behavior. The mother hamsters were cannibalistic. They were eating their young on the first day of life. And when they tested these cannibalistic mother hamsters, they found that they were completely devoid of one vitamin, vitamin B3. And when they administered vitamin B3, the cannibalistic behavior stopped. Now, what does that tell you? Does it tell you we need more gun laws that criminals aren't going to follow? Like, do we need our politicians really focusing on that? Or do we need our politicians focusing on doing something about the cause for this mental illness and this aggressive behavior, which is a deficiency of proper nutrients in the food supply and high toxicities like butanediol and glyphosate and all these other toxic chemicals being in the food supply. So we think that our politicians need to have the courage and the political will to actually put forth policies that will protect Americans. And that means providing access to safe, non-toxic, nutrient-dense food. And when that happens, let's just say the government doesn't do that, but when parents do that, I have a good example, if I can share that,
yes, please,
about a mother who did that for her child. And that this was a mother out of Santa Ana. Her name's Maria. And she said that she called me to tell me that when her son was 9 years old, he had mental health issues. And she was a single mom, low income, 4 kids, really struggling, and didn't know what to do about it. And the school called her one day and said, "You need to come pick up your son from school. He just threatened to blow up the school with a bomb and kill everyone in it." And she said, "Well, I told you he has mental health issues and I need help." So they said, "Okay." And they sent him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said, after assessing him, "Here's your SSRI drug, right, for mental health illness." And she said, "That's it? What about the side effects? What about the rest of his life?" And they said, "Well, you can either look at that or you can look at what you're feeding him." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "What about the pesticides? Have you thought about the pesticides, the dyes, the GMOs, the chemicals, the preservatives in the food you're feeding him?" And she's like, "No, I haven't." He said, "What are you feeding him?" She said, "Hot dogs, tacos, quesadillas, right? French fries, pizza, whatever I can get into him. He's a picky eater." And he said, "Well, it's either you feed him organic or give him this drug for the rest of his life." This is a very smart psychiatrist. So she fed her child organic food because, organic rice and beans are actually quite affordable and very nutritious. And so within 2 weeks, the school principal called her and said, "We don't know what you're doing, but this is a completely new human being. Keep doing what you're doing."
Wow.
And she told me, "Zen, I'm calling you because this is the day after the school shooting in Florida. And I know that my son, who's now 17, would have been one of those kids that would have gone to Walmart or some underground person, the people that don't follow gun laws, right? And bought a gun and shot the kids at his school." She's like, "I know that would have happened." And that's a very hard thing for a mother to admit. But she said, "But that's not going to happen because my son's eating organic and he's healthy and responsible and, capable. And he's even building school gardens and community gardens." And she said, "And he's not going to do that." And I said, "Well, you know what you did? You gave your son a new future. That was not going to be the future that he was going to have. You gave him a new future, and you gave every student at that school and every person in your community a new future because they're not mourning the trauma and loss of their loved ones. And you might have even given our country a new future because who knows what your son or any of those kids at that school is going to invent or create or run for office or do in the world, what service they'll provide." And so that's why Moms Across America is doing what we're doing, because we believe every single human being should have the ability and the capacity to be able to fulfill on their fullest potential and contribute to our community, their families and our communities and this country and the world and the way that they are meant to do. And so we will keep doing. That's why we say we are your partners in health. We will not stop. We will not give up, because the love for our families and, frankly, the love for our country will never end. This is a we problem, not a me problem. So we will continue doing that. And we know that in the schools, Barbara Reed-Stitt has shown that when she switched over the food in the school systems, the dropout rate in a school of 5,000 kids went from 500 kids a year dropping out, and probably could be becoming homeless or, having jobs that were not very fulfilling or whichever, went from 500 down to 14. And a significantly higher number of those kids went on to go to college when they were eating whole, foods, not highly processed foods with glyphosate and GMOs and toxic chemicals in it. And this study was done in the late 90s, by the way, when GMOs and glyphosate were introduced into the food supply. So when she, switched the foods out, she doesn't write about that in the book, but she was avoiding those things. And, frankly, that felt very betrayed by the government. That's when I learned, it was in 2012, actually, about these foods being in our food supply for decades without labeling and without warning. It's really a very deep betrayal by the government on the American people.
Boy, I think you're 100% right. And I've got to say, great job on putting all this together. One of the things that I think you really touched on was that, we see nowadays, it seems like people are so reactive, and you can watch this on social media. You can watch it even when you interact with people, particularly those people that seem to be highly affected by, I'll say, people that eat a lot of fast food. I notice that sometimes when I run into people that do this, they are so emotionally reactive that you could say one thing to them and they take it as like a personal assault. And you see this kind of drama kind of pouring out everywhere. Do you feel that this is related to the food supply as well?
The drama and assaults, you're saying, the aggression that's happening in the country? Yes, absolutely. And let me tell you exactly why. And this is because there are scientific studies to show that glyphosate targets and kills the beneficial gut bacteria in your gut. And it allows for the proliferation of the pathogenic gut bacteria, such as Salmonella and E. coli, which not only contribute to very fierce and difficult UTIs, which are very painful, but the disruption of the gut bacteria, that balance of beneficial and pathogenic gut bacteria, can contribute to mood disorders, because that's the stronghold of serotonin. And serotonin is what has people feel satiated and content, right? And if you don't feel satiated, or you're going to have anxiety, you're going to want more porn or more alcohol or more drugs or more gambling or more phone time, screen time, or more, the thing that gives you the dopamine, you're going to want more of that because you don't have that ability and serotonin and, dopamine in your body, because your gut microbiome is all messed up because you've been eating glyphosate and other toxic chemicals on a consistent basis. The gut is also the stronghold of the immune system. And so when your immune system is off balance, you're going to have inflammation. Again, another result can be anxiety and mood disorders and cancer and, all types of chronic health issues. And so the gut is really, like Hippocrates says, like all disease starts in the gut. Like the gut is really an extremely important, essential part to protect in your body from these toxic chemicals. And when somebody has addiction and mood disorders, really, I believe a huge portion of marriages could probably be blamed on gluten sensitivities, which is not actually gluten. It's for a lot of people. There are people who are sensitive to gliadin, which is in the modern wheat. They wouldn't be allergic to ancient grain wheat, which is like myself. I was tested positive for an intolerance to the modern protein, which is gliadin. It's kind of like nicotine in tobacco. It has people eat more wheat, coincidentally, or like xenoestrogen sprayed on women's sanitary products. They make women bleed more, right? It's kind of like the nicotine and it's really evil. Wow. So this gliadin in modern wheat, has people eat more wheat. And a lot of us are actually, our bodies are very smartly and justly sensitive to it. So we develop gluten intolerances. But most people, according to Dr. Zach Bush, who is also triple board certified, he says that 80% of the gluten intolerances are actually reactions to glyphosate. And it's not a glyphosate allergy. Okay. It's not like, some people can tolerate and some people, it's a reaction to glyphosate, which nobody should be consuming. And so when you eat organic, a lot of people, when they eat organic wheat, they don't have these problems. Like myself and my kids, we got over 20 something different food intolerances by supporting the gut, by allowing the gut to heal. We use Ion Biome, which used to be called Restore by Dr. Zach Bush. It's on our website on momsacrossamerica.org to to restore the integrity of the gut lining and support your body to heal. I used MSM by MRM to help coat the lining of the stomach for my son. We went all organic. He did acupuncture and green drinks and probiotics, sauerkraut, kombucha, apple cider vinegar, which, by the way, apple cider vinegar, kombucha, and sauerkraut have a bacteria in it called acetobacter, which has been shown in the soil. So we don't know about in the gut, but in the soil to actually break down glyphosate into non-toxic components. So I think it's a good idea, even though we don't have the human studies on this, to consume apple cider vinegar, kombucha, and sauerkraut on a daily basis. And there have been other studies on other types of vinegars and fermented vegetables to show that they actually do break down pesticides, like other types of pesticides. So I think there's a very strong, possibility there that eating those those foods will also support the body in breaking down glyphosate. So so what we're seeing when people go to an AA meeting and then have coffee, which can be highly, contaminated with pesticides, and eat a piece of chocolate cake, which can have high levels of glyphosate on it, is that they are then destroying the beneficial gut bacteria in their gut, which would otherwise be supporting them to be sober. And so I am very unhappy with the lack of discussion about that in addiction circles. And I really would love for it to get out more to people who are concerned with addiction, which has affected my own family and is very, very difficult to manage if the people are not eating organic.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because the next thing I wanted to talk to you about was just a little bit about the gut and addiction. And, previously you'd mentioned butadiol before, right? And basically one of those things that actually breaks down into is actually a street drug known as GHB. And this was a street drug that we actually ran into quite a bit. Particularly, it's very popular in like Miami, Florida, and kind of like these places like that. And basically, the GHB is also known as, the street name for it is liquid ecstasy, G, or fantasy. And so,
What?
yeah, can you believe that? It's gamma hydroxybutyric acid, or GHB. And this was commonly used. Like, I saw this a lot when I was doing my training in Miami, because I did my residency there. And we'd have people that come into the trauma center and they'd be just all hyped up. They'd have like symptoms of euphoria initially. And then a lot of times, depending on the dose they would get, they would even get seizures from this drug. So a lot of times we get people seizing from like a nightclub, and we're like, what's going on? We got to figure it out. And this was extremely popular in a lot of the nightclubs in Miami. And I just think it's very interesting to see that, like, literally there are drugs they're active metabolites of street drugs that are in these products, and we're feeding them to our kids. The government's looking the other way, just completely ignoring it.
Glyphosate actually has several hundred, if not over 1,000 studies on it now. You just don't see it in the news. You don't see very much information about it. But on momsacrossamerica.org, under data, we have a couple hundred. We don't have all of them because there's just too many now. But you don't see studies on humans and glyphosate. You're right. And you don't see studies on things like butadiol and people consuming that, or the aviary drug, the narcobazine that I mentioned, or the antibiotics. I forgot to mention, in 40 to 60% of the top 10 fast food samples that we tested were positive for these antibiotics. One of them is called monicin, the other one's called narracin. And what they can do is cause the back hind legs of dogs and horses to go paralyzed.
Whoa.
At very low levels. They're very toxic to dogs and horses. Cows can eat these antibiotics, and that's why they're in the burgers and some of the foods. But dogs and horses, for some reason, are really, don't react well to it. And, my question is, what is it doing to human beings? You go to a street fair, a county fair in the summertime, and you see people on those little scooters with the giant purple swollen legs.
Yep.
I have to wonder, are they eating fast food? Are they consuming these antibiotics that cause the hind legs of dogs and horses to go paralyzed? Could that be connected to what's going on with humans? The NIH, the National Institute of Health, should be using our taxpayer dollars to study stuff like this.
100%.
Not to support, Pfizer and Merck to develop new vaccines or new drugs that, just make them more money and cause all kinds of side effects. We need to be studying what is the side effect of children, of our girls, eating narcobazine, an aviary contraceptive, on a daily basis at school. Keep in mind that when a woman is pregnant with a baby girl, she is also pregnant with her grandchildren, because the eggs that a baby girl has are a finite number, and the baby girl has the eggs of her children, right, which is her mother's grandchildren. And so what is happening to these girls when they're consuming an aviary contraceptive on a daily basis at school? We don't know. We don't know. And the government is not doing anything about it. This needs to stop. And we need our government to take this matter into their hands and actually do something about it.
And I just wanted to share with you, one of the most common resources used by a lot of physicians and practitioners is a website called Up to Date, which takes all of the research that's out there, particularly related to like humans and how to deal with, human health, right? It's designed for humans. And they compile it into one database. You can easily search for things.
Really?
The only thing they talk about glyphosate is essentially acute poisoning, like as if you got sprayed, by accident or something like that. No information about chronic effects, no information about any of these other things. And so it's literally, to me, it looks like, suppression, because my guess is that there were trials out there that would indicate a lot of these things, but many, what about trials?
Yeah, there are.
They can basically suppress them,
Yeah, there's animal studies, but there are also observations, like not experiments on humans, but they have studies showing, glyphosate levels in pregnant women with high levels, that live near farms. And when the higher levels of glyphosate that they had in their urine, the higher levels of autism and birth defects and miscarriages and prenatal births now, that, there are, it's like 40 to 70% higher rate of preterm birth and miscarriages if you have high levels of, I don't know about high levels, but if you have glyphosate present in your urine as a pregnant woman. I mean, there are definitely studies out there, and I agree with you that there is suppression happening, and journals that are simply choosing not to cover it because the pharmaceutical companies and the drug companies and the agrochemical companies, which we just discussed, are all one and the same, are doing such a good job in pressuring the journals. They're even buying out journals, and they're telling them that, oh, it's controversial. This is too controversial. If you allow this to be published, you won't be seen as credible. You need to retract that study. If they do publish studies, they tell them they need to retract it, and some journals do. And what's happening is, good doctors like yourself that are actually doing your research don't have access to independent science that proves that glyphosate is incredibly harmful. And it's used to the tune of 280 million pounds a year on our food supply, sprayed directly on our food. And it's used and on the fields that are growing our food. And it doesn't break down from the soil unless you're using things to purposely break it down, sometimes for 20 years. So it's being absorbed into the plants. That's why we're finding it in wine. Glyphosate is sprayed around the grapevines. It's not sprayed on the grapevines. It's sprayed around them, and then it uptakes into the roots and into the grapes. And same with almonds and almond milk. It's got to be organic. It's got to be organic wine. It's got to be organic almond milk. It's got to be organic hummus. Hummus is very high in glyphosate. It's got to be organic wheat. And so when people say, oh, it doesn't matter. I eat 80% organic, and, I know it's very difficult to be 100%. But if you are dealing with inflammation, addiction, autism, aggression, behavioral issues, that is inflammation in the body. And you can't expect to put a campfire out if you're adding a teaspoon of fuel, right? Just a little bit. If you're like, oh, I'll just eat 10% non-organic, or I'll just eat hummus now and then, that's not organic. Some of the highest levels are in hummus and chickpeas and oats, by the way, the oats that you eat in the morning for breakfast and the wheat that you eat. Just a little bit is okay. Well, you don't know if that little bit is just the little bit that's going to tip, overflow your cup of toxins and become Hashimoto's, or, put you on the Asperger's or autism spectrum, or cause, colon cancer or stomach cancer. You know what I mean? You just don't know what amount that is that will have you, tip over into that chronic disease area. So you have to stop putting fuel on the fire altogether. And if you want to heal from these gut issues, you need to go 100% organic, at least for a couple months. And by the way, after 2 weeks, you will be sleeping better. I'm not a doctor, but this is what I hear. You'll be sleeping better. You'll be feeling better. You'll be feeling more energetic. Your rashes will start to go away. My mother's psoriasis almost disappeared when she went gluten-free and started eating more organic. Autoimmune issues will clear up when you go organic. And addiction will be easier to recover from. You really just aren't giving yourself a chance if you are continuing to put glyphosate in your gut and depleting your serotonin levels. You need those serotonin levels. You need to do things that support your body in making the serotonin itself, being out in the sun, exercising, laughing, journaling, connecting with friends. And frankly, that's why AA is so successful, because you're connecting with other people. It's that interpersonal, those connections. But if I could be president for a day, I would wave a wand and there would be nothing but organic food served at any type of addiction meeting or rehab, hospitals, schools, anywhere. I mean, the whole food supply would be organic, actually. So
I think that's what needs to happen. And then a lot of Americans are also unaware of the fact that many chemicals that are banned in Europe are still allowed even in our food all the time. Like, aspartame is a good example. Have you found much difference between other societies besides America, having exposure to these?
Yes, absolutely. The food was tested. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency tested 7,800 samples because an activist like myself, Tony Mitra, a man from India who lives in Canada, bugged the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for years. And they finally tested 7,800 samples. And they found that the samples from China and Mexico were 40 to 70% lower in glyphosate.
Wow.
And other countries such as Europe, they only allow, for instance, 3 endocrine disrupting chemicals in their society. We allow 1,200. We have red food dyes and chemicals allowed in America that are banned in Europe. Syngenta, which is based in Switzerland, Switzerland does not allow paraquat to be used on the food supply. It is used frequently in Hawaii on the GMO crops, right? It's used all over the United States. There are chemicals that are allowed here in our food supply that are not allowed in other countries. And that's why when your wife goes to another country, she can eat the wheat, because they're not spraying it with glyphosate as a drying agent, most likely. They're not using dicamba and paraquat and 2,4-D. So it's usually not the food that we're allergic to. There's been a 400% increase in allergies and ER visits since GMOs were introduced, right? This is tracked, right? They track ER visits for life-threatening allergies, and the numbers went up 40%. And this stat is 12 years old now. This is from when we first started. So I don't know what it is now, but since GMOs, which it means glyphosate sprayed, on the crops, were introduced, ER allergy, that means life-threatening, children and adults were going to die from food, exposure to food, went up 400% within that period of time. Was it within that 17 years? And so, but that doesn't happen nearly as much in other countries. And since our testing and finding glyphosate in breast milk, 60 other countries have either banned or revoked. I think it might be 64. Other countries have either banned or revoked or restricted the use of glyphosate, because these other countries don't have a strong hold over them, like from the corporations on their government, the way that we do. They have actually more political autonomy. Like, they actually have more democracy than we do. It's really quite scary. We have a corporatocracy here. We have corporations running the show.
100%. That's exactly, I totally agree with that. And that's what we're seeing now. And just, it was eye-opening for a lot of Americans, that during COVID, they started to see the curtain be pulled back just a little bit. Because I think it was during this time, it was like over 50% of Americans no longer trust mainstream medicine. And
yes,
and I mean, for good reason.
That number sounds about right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and a lot of these stats that I've said, and, that other people are using, like Children's Health Defense and Organic Consumers Association, all that. A lot of these stats, Robin O'Brien, she's the one that I learned about GMOs from, TED Talk on a Plate. The stats that we are using are 10 years old, 12 years old. They're old stats. Like, the stat of 1 out of 5 people in America have mental illness. That's an old stat. I think it's more like 1 out of 2 or 3 now. And 1 out of 6 of our children have a learning disability. Well, when I talk to preschool teachers, I've talked to multiple preschool teachers now. They say, one came up to me and said, I've got 13 kids in my preschool class. It's a normal preschool class. It is not a special ed preschool class. And 12 of them are on the spectrum.
Wow.
12 out of 13. She's pulling her hair out. She's having such a difficult time being able to even manage the class, to get kids to sit down, to listen. It's really, really difficult as a teacher now. I think teachers should be some of the highest paid people in our society. Both my parents were teachers. I know what they were paid back then. It's peanuts. And now their job is 1,000 times higher. So it's ridiculous what's going on in our society as far as the exposure to our children of toxic chemicals that are causing learning disorders, mental health issues, aggression, behavioral issues. They cannot fulfill on their potential. They cannot have good relationships. If they're hitting other kids, they're not having friendships with them. They're lonely. They're sad. They're isolated. We're creating a society of depressed, sick people. No wonder why they get violent.
Exactly.
This is a mental health crisis, which results in a physical health crisis, which is going to result in the decline of our country as a superpower. And the rise of all these other countries, with some of them with very questionable, freedoms, rights and freedoms for their citizens, to become the most powerful countries in the world. I mean, we are really in a very concerning place in America today. And if we don't get corporate money out of politics, we are headed for the decline of this nation, and in a very short period of time. And not just because of health issues and mental health issues. That 1 out of 5 people with mental health illness, that includes politicians and policemen and teachers, right? It includes the people who are taking care of our kids. But in addition to that, the reproductive crisis that we have now, men have half the sperm level that their grandparents did. If Dr. Shauna Swan is correct in her book on the projections of what's going on, it's called Countdown, and it's about the decline of sperm rates and fertility in our country. In some places around the world, around here, it's going to be about 20 years. In other places, 10 to 6 years, where men will not be able to procreate naturally. The majority of the men there, they just won't have the sperms won't be functioning properly. And so the only people that will be able to procreate, if we continue at this level of toxic exposure and decline of fertility, the only people that will be able to procreate will be the elites, the people that can afford $40,000 a pop to have, in vitro fertilization. So I know this sounds like fear mongering and it sounds like a dramatic situation, but there are so many scientific studies showing this now, and it's not being discussed in mainstream media. They're just going to put, fires and violence and crime and,
whatever
other types of non-important news items on mainstream media.
Exactly. And the thing is, you're 100% right. I think it is very dramatic. And that's what we see also clinically is we have people that have had the worst, endocrine disruption ever. We have we have men that are 30 years old and their testosterone is less than 200. And it's just like, what's going on?
Is that really bad? I'm not sure. Testosterone.
Oh, yes.
What is it supposed to be?
Oh, so that's very bad. So minimum is usually around 250 for most laboratories. And so just to find a young man who has such low testosterone is extremely concerning, because it's not like he's doing anything particularly wrong. It's that the exposure to these things are actually causing the loss of testosterone. But one of the things that I wanted to point out one more time was just, I think there's more addictive behavior now than ever before. And you'd mentioned a little bit about, the gut and addiction. I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that, because we see especially with children, it seems like all the children are on these video games all day long. And there's a higher level of depression than we've ever seen in kids. They're more socially isolated. Is this also related to the exposure to these various chemicals and heavy metals?
Absolutely. So what's happening is when they eat these foods and destroy their beneficial gut bacteria, it allows for the pathogenic gut bacteria to proliferate. And the pathogenic gut bacteria tell the brain, they actually communicate, through the vagus nerve in the gut, and it goes up to the brain. Those pathogenic gut bacteria tell the brain and tell your body that they want more dairy, they want more sugar, they want more wheat. And so these children will become sort of addicted to only chicken nuggets and pizza or mozzarella sticks. Like, they will kick and scream and bang their head against the refrigerator because they want ice cream, they want Coke, they want, highly processed food. And that's because that highly processed food and that dairy and that sugar and that wheat feed the pathogenic gut bacteria. So it's not actually your child being a brat or, being controlling or that type of thing. It's actually the bacteria in their body screaming for more food. And when they get low levels of that, like, they haven't eaten dairy all day, they will start banging their head against the refrigerator for dairy. Do you know what I mean? They will act out that is an addictive what do you call that? When you have a reaction and you're on withdrawal, it's a withdrawal behavior. So they will act out in reaction to that. Now, some kids act out in reaction to red food dyes. They'll punch holes in walls and become aggressive. And the problem is that when they have low levels of serotonin and dopamine in their bodies, the video games will give them that push and that rush of dopamine. So their bodies cannot help but to get addicted. It's just a natural chemical reaction. It's not that they're trying to defy you. They shouldn't be smacked or hit or beaten or yelled, screamed at. It's really their bodies is going through a withdrawal, and they want to get back to that video game because that's the only way for their body that their body knows how to get more of that fix. And so I have heard tragic stories, like a 13-year-old boy. He was 12, and then he was on for his 13th birthday. He wanted to have his friends over to play video games all day. That's just what he wanted to do with his friends. And when a few days before his birthday, he got so mad at the video game that he was playing, he threw the controller and broke the TV. And his dad would not buy him a new screen for his birthday party. So his son hung himself on his birthday.
Whoa.
So, and I don't know what that boy was eating, but I would guess it's not very good food, and it does contribute, having those low levels of serotonin and dopamine in the body contribute to that need for something else, whether it's video games or porn. There are 10-year-olds now watching porn, and by their 12 or 14, they're labeled pedophiles because of what pops up on their screen and what they click on and what they watch. We have an entire generation, especially of young men, I think, being destroyed by media and by the chemicals in the food supply. And they're much of them are endocrine disruptors. So they don't have the testosterone level that you said. They have way too much estrogen. They are developing breasts. They have lower sex drives. They're not even interested in having sex. The teen pregnancy rate has declined. And I don't think that's because of, just being more careful about sex. I think there's other reasons. And in places like Japan, where they have very high levels of addiction to video games, and also, by the way, the highest levels of glyphosate in their food supply, because Japan imports grains from the United States. And I believe when President Trump's first visit to any country was to President Abe, that's when he convinced the Japanese government to accept GMOs into their food supply, which was not happening before, and also raised the level of glyphosate residues. The levels went up by 600%. And this is because I believe the Japanese government loans the largest grain distribution center in the world, and it's in Convent, Louisiana. And that distribution center has 85 different grain receptacles along the Mississippi River. That makes Japan basically the boss of big ag in the United States, right? The Midwestern farmers are basically working for Japan. So the Japanese government pays foreign purchases 300 million tons of grains, GMO soy and corn from the US each year, and distributes it to China and Japan and Taiwan and South Korea and, Philippines and all of that. So the Japanese government is in charge mostly of our food supply, but they're being influenced by the US government to accept grains that are GMO and glyphosate. They're being bullied, frankly, to accept grains that are GMO and glyphosate sprayed. And I believe that they were effectively bullied by Trump because he became buddy-buddy with North Korea. And the US has a military base in Okinawa and in Japan. And the Japanese government saw that military base as much more important, right? Especially if the US president was going to be buddy-buddy with North Korea, which is a threat to Japan. And so they were strong-armed into accepting GMO grains into their country and to accepting glyphosate levels to be raised. And now the Japanese people are being poisoned, and the rates of developmental delays in Japan and South Korea, which is where a lot of those grains go to, are the highest in the world now.
Wow.
They're the developmental delays of the children. The numbers of autism and children with disabilities and all that have skyrocketed over the past, less than a decade. And so the Japanese people the citizens though, are working very hard. My book, Unstoppable, which is available on Amazon, was also published in Japan. I've toured Japan in 9 different cities, and there are now leaders in every single prefecture, the 47 prefectures that I also work with, to get organic food in the schools. And the government has accepted organic food into 50 schools, and they're working on getting organic food into more schools. So they are working much more efficiently there than here in the United States.
And could you talk a little bit more about your book and kind of who would be a good person to get that book?
Sure. Yeah. I've had all kinds of people read my book, doctors, and we actually have contributors, doctors, lawyers, scientists, farmers, researchers, moms, dads, all kinds of people. It is my personal story about finding out about GMOs and glyphosate in the food supply and what I did about it and creating Moms Across America. But it's also a deep dive into the food supply, the science behind glyphosate and GMOs, the farming, situations, how it created that. And I've gathered data from all, it's really a community effort from all kinds of people to bring you a clear and concise and understandable story around the food supply and my activism around that. Some people say it's kind of like a course on how to be an activist as well and how to keep your family safe. And I do have a chapter called How to Talk to Your Family About GMOs, and you can use that structure and that method for anything that's difficult to talk about. So I highly encourage people to buy the book and to share it with their friends and family.
Absolutely. We'll definitely include a link for the book on the podcast here. And then would you also maybe talk about, like, if you are a mom and you've seen this interview, or maybe you're a physician and you're treating, a patient and you start to see some of these symptoms, what's the best thing that they can do, or what do you recommend, or what are things that you have seen that can be done to help detox your children or to detox maybe even an adult?
Yeah, so I would say, of course, number one is buy organic, but you want to also educate your children and create partnership with them. And I'll share a brief story that sort of depicting that I also share in my book. And that is when my eldest son was 9 years old. He was sitting at the breakfast table and he had a red rash around his mouth. It looked like a vacuum cleaner had sucked on his mouth, and his lips were swollen and red and cracked, and there was a red line around his mouth. And that had been going on and off for 7 months, for 2 weeks at a time. And the poor kid had to go to school like that. It just was so painful and looked so unpleasant. And he looked at me one day and he was so sad, and he said forlornly, "Mom, I wish all my allergies would go away." And I said, "Me too, buddy." And then I realized that in my head, the voice in my head was saying that's never going to happen, because the doctors had told me, the Western medical doctors had said that his allergies were only going to get worse, especially the nut allergies. They would probably kill him if he had continual exposure, right? That those exposures only get worse. And so, but then I realized what the voice in my head was saying. I was like, well, wait a second, that's not empowering. That's seeing him as a victim, me as a victim. It's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better, So I was like, I'm committed to being courageous and creative and a contribution in this world. That's just sort of the possibility that I created for myself. I had done this program called Landmark, and I was really committed to being in an empowering context, right? And so I thought about what would an empowering context be for him. And it reminded me of a story which I told him about my cousin Sarah, who had gone gluten-free for a year and had been able to heal her gut to such the extent that she could eat a slice of pizza at a birthday party or a piece of cake at a wedding and not have a severe reaction. And so I reminded him of that. And I said, "Ben, would you like to someday be able to eat a slice of pizza at a birthday party and feel okay?" And he's like, "Yes," because that currently wasn't happening. We were bringing all of our food to every birthday party. And so I said, "Well, would you do whatever it takes? Would you be my partner in your health? Would you drink green drinks and try acupuncture and alternative therapies? Like, would you do whatever it takes?" And he thought about it seriously. And then he said, "Yes." And I said, then I put my hand out and shook his hand. I said, "Then I promise you, you will get better." And that was like a white light moment for me. Like, I did not know how that was going to happen. I did not have some kind of plan. I just knew that if I made a promise to my son and we educated ourselves and we were willing to do whatever it takes, I was like, in my state of mind, I was like, I will eat birdseed with my son. I don't care what it takes, right? I will do whatever it takes to help my son get better. And so we did that. We watched movies. We watched GMO OMG. We watched Modified. Oh, no, maybe that came out later, actually. But we watched Genetic Roulette. He was 9 years old. King Corn, I think, is another movie. The Future of Food, Food Inc., right? There were all kinds of movies on Netflix and Amazon that talk about the food supply. And so we learned together, and he went non-GMO first, and his allergies were dramatically reduced. Instead of all around his mouth, there was a faint pink line under his lip that only lasted 2 days. And within a year of eating organic, when my other son had autism symptoms, we decided to go 100% organic because of that glyphosate exposure, the glyphosate in his urine, the level of a farmer. We went 100% organic at that time. And not only did my son with the autism symptoms get better in 6 weeks and no longer have detectable levels of glyphosate in his urine, but my first son with the allergy symptoms, his levels went from 19 down to a 0.2. So he no longer has life-threatening allergies. When my son's allergies went from a 19 down to a 0.2, he was no longer and is no longer going to die from food. He no longer has a life-threatening allergy. And so I have peace of mind, and that's priceless. And I also have a son who is making healthy choices on his own. And that's what you want to do ultimately. I want to encourage moms to not just control the food that's in the house by saying, we're not going to eat that. We're not going to eat that. No, you can't have that. No, educate your children about why it's important. Treat them like grown human beings, even if their minds are still developing, and create partnership with them and get a promise and make a promise to them. Make a promise. Look, this is, I promise you, I am only going to bring, healthy food into this house, or you're going to get better, or I'm going to get better, or we're going to do this together. And, this is what I'm creating is going to happen. Now, might you fail? You might, but then you just make a new promise, right? You take actions that you normally never would have taken in order to have your family get better and to honor your word, which is important to your children. And you will see miracles. I really do believe. And my children now can eat all of the foods before that they couldn't eat. They can eat the wheat, the dairy, the nuts. He doesn't purposely eat the nuts, but if he does, he doesn't have to go to the hospital. But they can eat the eggs and the dairy and the wheat and all of that as long as it's organic. And that is a huge relief. Huge relief. It is possible. They can get better. And the autism symptoms and the allergies and the autoimmune issues have all cleared up, and only have problems if they start eating, junk food again.
Man, that's amazing. I think you're so right about getting the buy-in from the children too, and having them understand like, hey, it's so easy to go to the fast food place. So it's so easy to go to Chick-fil-A, but you want to.
Yeah. Well, as far as fast food goes, I just want to say, if you are going to do that, we have found that the testing shows that Chipotle had the lowest levels of glyphosate. They did have some pesticides, but Chipotle is actually invested in chemical-free robotic weed management. So we really appreciate that. And we think Chipotle's management understands the problem with what's going on in the food supply. They were the ones that did non-GMO, for a long time and advertised that. I believe they still do, and have many of their ingredients are organic. So that's the best option we feel for, and we're not being sponsored by them or paid by them to say this. This is just what we're saying, reporting from the test results. And we know it's important to have food available. So we encourage moms to cook on Sunday, cook an organic roasted chicken, cook the burger meat, have that stuff ready in your freezer and Tupperware. In your fridge and Tupperware, or in the freezer. Make a big pot of lentil stew, make a big pot of beans, make a big pot of rice, put it in the fridge though. Don't let it sit out. And, make sure that you have food ready for kids. Making a burrito wrap, with chicken and beans and rice that are already cooked. Really easy. Takes like 3 minutes. So there's a lot of things that you can do ahead of time to prevent going to fast food places.
That's very, very wise. And I think that's what everybody needs to do. I know that we're starting to do that more and more. And I think what I saw personally was just like my own son, when I actually saw your study come across, and I was like, wow, we need to really, because we were already trying to back off fast food anyway for a lot of reasons. But then once I saw that, I was like, wow, because he used to love Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A was like his favorite. And as soon as we got him off Chick-fil-A, he started getting better.
They also put MSG in there, I believe, in Chick-fil-A foods. And we were really sad to see after we put out our results, instead of them saying, oh, we're going to do better, they put out a statement saying, we're going to allow antibiotics in our chicken. Like before, they had a commitment to not have antibiotics in the chicken. And then we found, hormones and antibiotics in the chicken. So they're like, okay, well, actually, we're going to go ahead and allow it. They didn't say we're going to do better. So, that to us just shows, a commitment to profits, not to people's health. And we're very dismayed by that. And they could do better. The fact is that, many of these CEOs are making tens of millions of dollars a year, setting aside $1 million for quality control testing, to find out where the source is of this food is coming from is not hard. I mean, moms across America is doing it with a couple $1,000s. You know what I mean? Like, or maybe 10,000, 10 or 20 or 40,000. Just it does take a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money to them. Is my point.
Yeah, especially for a large corporation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got to wrap up, but I really appreciate this. Was very enlightening for me as well. I didn't know that bit about butanediol, so I'd like more information about that. Sure. And that up-to-date website, physicians. I wonder if there's a way to convince them to actually publish some reports on glyphosate that reveal the truth, the independent studies. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Zen. It's been such an honor having you, and thank you for your message. If people want to follow you and find you, what would be the best way for people to follow you or to reach out to you?
Go to momsacrossamerica.org or .com. Either one will get you there. And we invite you to sign up for our newsletter and click on the link on Mondays. We set out an invitation for a Moms Connect call. It's not every Monday, but it's most Mondays, just not holidays or when I travel. And it's a discussion that we have when sometimes we have experts come on and talk about issues, and we all learn from each other. It's a conversation. So we invite you to connect with myself and other moms all across the country, and dads. There's mothers and others working to create healthy communities. So we appreciate you coming on. And I also have a show called The New MDs, Moms, Doctors, and Scientists Working Together to Heal Our Children, on the third Tuesday of every month with Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro. She's a pediatrician. And we discuss issues such as cancer or, autism, different types of issues that are affecting our children. So I invite you to check that out on Rumble.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. And once again, thank you for sharing your message. You've made a huge difference in so many lives, more than you'll probably ever know.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adam. Appreciate you and your listeners. Take care.
Take care. Bye. Thank you.